네 부하들이 우리를
A sudden, cataclysmic level 20 earthquake reduced all of South Korea to rubble overnight. Everywhere you looked was pure devastation. The few lucky survivors banded together to form a small village. But now, life-sustaining resources were nearly gone. Clean water? Practically a myth. One day, while out hunting, Ji-wan spotted a crocodile up ahead. He instantly lit an arrow and nailed the croc right in the head bullseye. Just as he thought he'd bagged his prey, the croc's eyes snapped open. Turns out, in this brutal environment, even animals had started to mutate in strange, terrifying ways. As the beast lunged at him, Ji-wan panicked and dove into a car for cover, but he underestimated the croc's power big time. Just when Ji-wan thought he was toast, Nam-san showed up right on cue. A seasoned survivalist, Nam-san made quick work of the croc with a few brutal hacks.
아이 맛있겠다.
The best part? Nam-san wasn't stingy with the kill. Instead of hoarding the rare meal, he let villagers trade whatever they had for a share of that precious croc meat. At that moment, a woman who was so broke all she had left was money tried to trade her jewelry. But in the apocalypse, bling meant nothing. It was basically worthless. Luckily, Nam-san, kind as ever, didn't mind. He handed her a small snake in return. It wasn't much, but the woman had already fallen hard for Nam-san. Soon after, the heroine Suna arrived with her grandmother. Judging by Ji-wan's puppy dog eyes, it was clear Suna had always been his dream girl. He lived to impress her. He didn't expect his big moment to come so soon. Out of nowhere, a modded pickup truck crashed into the village. A gang of thugs jumped out, claiming they were from the police. They said they were here to arrest a suspect. Even though the villagers knew they were lying through their teeth, they were powerless against the gang's brute force. Then the gang leader spotted Suna. He couldn't believe someone that beautiful still existed in this ruined world. Without hesitation, he decided to take Suna with them too. Ji-wan finally had his shot to play the hero, but sadly, he was no match. The thugs had him face down in the dirt in seconds. Nam-san wasn't planning to get involved, but watching his buddy get beat down by a mob left him no choice. He stepped in and took out the gang leader like it was nothing. Only then did the gang realize just how badass Nam-san really was. Begging for mercy, the thug quickly spilled the truth about their gang. That's when Nam-san spotted something shocking: a bottle of clean mineral water. When pressed, the thug said they'd found it in an apartment building. The villagers were stunned. After such a massive quake, there shouldn't be any buildings left standing. The thug's claim sounded absurd, but something about it rang true. Nam-san, sensing he wasn't lying, decided to let them go. Once things finally calmed down, the woman started eyeing Nam-san like she was in heat. The look made Nam-san clench involuntarily. He quickly pretended not to notice and made a hasty exit. The next morning, while Ji-wan was still debating whether the apartment actually existed, something even more unexpected happened. A group of strangers in suits showed up looking for Suna. The elderly man leading them claimed to be a teacher. He said they had established a sanctuary in Seoul to ensure humanity's survival. Their mission? To recruit young families and teenagers to live and study in the shelter because the youth, he said, were humanity's future. According to him, many villagers had already moved in. The place was fully stocked with supplies, had top-tier security, and offered everything needed for a stable life. Nam-san was skeptical about the idea of a standing apartment building, but realizing this could change Suna's future, he encouraged her and her grandmother to go. What none of them knew was they were walking straight into a massive trap. That night, Suna packed her things and set out. On the road, they encountered another family also headed to the supposed sanctuary. That's where Suna met Joo-ye, who would become a close friend. The journey was long and harsh. Suna's elderly grandmother was already struggling to breathe from exhaustion. Seeing how difficult the path ahead would be, the teacher offered a kind suggestion: let the elderly rest at a nearby medical outpost. A vehicle from the sanctuary would pick them up the next day. Everyone was deeply moved by the kindness and quickly thanked him, but Anna never imagined this would be the last time she'd see her grandmother. Moments later, two elderly villagers were led to the edge of a deep ravine. Before one of them could react, the so-called escort shoved him straight into the abyss. Turns out Nam-san was just bored, so he took Ji-wan out hunting and they accidentally stumbled into the whole mess. To cover up the crime, one of the men drew his pistol, ready to silence Ji-wan for good, but just in time, Nam-san's machete flew through the air. They thought they'd taken out the escort until he suddenly got back up. As the two pulled weapons from their bodies and kept coming, Nam-san and Ji-wan realized something was very wrong. No matter how many times they knocked them down, the escorts just wouldn't stay down like they were on cheat mode. The real nightmare began when one of them fell into Ji-wan's trap and without flinching, sawed off his own leg to break free. Ji-wan's mind began to unravel. What kind of monsters feel no pain? Just when things looked hopeless, a woman named Eun-ho appeared out of nowhere. Thanks to her surprise attack, Nam-san managed to decapitate the second escort with her help, ending the nightmare for now. After they gave Suna's grandmother a proper burial, Eun-ho revealed why she was really there. She had come to find Nam-san. Then she told them everything. She used to be a sergeant in the special forces. After the quake hit, she and her team were out on a rescue mission when they discovered something unbelievable. A single apartment building had survived, untouched. Even more shocking, they found clean underground water there, so they started living there with other survivors. But that peaceful refuge didn't last. Everything changed the moment a certain doctor arrived. Thanks to his medical background, the doctor quickly became a key figure in the community. But over time, Eun-ho noticed something disturbing. He kept asking young people to assist with his experiments. None of them ever came back. Eun-ho kept digging like a dog with a bone until the doctor finally told her the truth. He gave a signal to one of the officers who then demonstrated something shocking.
무슨 짓입니까?
이게 양 박사님 신기술이야.
Eun-ho couldn't believe her eyes. The man was completely unharmed. No matter what he did, that's when the doctor revealed his secret. He had discovered a way to make humans immortal, but the process required young subjects to complete. Now, with the experiment nearing its final stage, the doctor claimed he was about to become humanity's savior. Eun-ho couldn't bring herself to be part of their twisted scheme. In a flash, before her teammates could react, she broke free and took them down. A bullet from the officer grazed her shoulder as she fled, but she managed to escape alive. Later, Eun-ho told Nam-san that because of her betrayal, all her teammates had been imprisoned in the dungeon. To stop the doctor from hurting anyone else, she begged Nam-san to help her rescue them. Realizing Suna might be in danger, Ji-wan was now more desperate than anyone to act. But with soldiers guarding the apartment complex, charging in blindly wasn't an option. To understand the layout and ensure the plan didn't fail, Nam-san remembered something: the water bottle carried by the escort. It instantly reminded him of the thugs they'd encountered earlier, so he decided to track them down and get the truth. Meanwhile, inside the apartment building, two rival gangs were amusing themselves by tormenting the hostages they'd captured. But just as they were having their fun, Nam-san burst in and shouted them to a halt. The thugs were furious that someone dared interrupt their fun. The two gang leaders immediately got ready to make their move on Nam-san. But even with the numbers on their side, they were no match for Nam-san's terrifying skill, and definitely not against someone with a special forces background. One by one, the bosses were floored. The rest of the gang scattered like rats. Those who didn't run were soon on the receiving end of Nam-san's brutal interrogation. Ji-wan, meanwhile, discovered a stash of handguns inside a crate. That made Nam-san even more curious about what was really going on in the apartment complex. But the gang members had never experienced Nam-san's iron fists, so they weren't about to spill everything just yet.
넌 저도 잘 가고 있어? 모르잖아.
As their buddies were knocked into hibernation, the bald leader, now terrified, gave in and spilled everything. Turns out the apartment had been taken over by special forces, controlling most of the remaining resources. They held all the power. Under pressure from the soldiers, the gang was forced to kidnap teenagers and trade them to the doctor. Once Nam-san learned that the delivery day was the only time outsiders were allowed into the building, he didn't need to ask anything else.
말하느라고 피곤할 텐데 한숨 자라. 아유.
He and the others immediately set out for the apartment. Meanwhile, after a long and exhausting journey, Suna and her group finally arrived at the so-called sanctuary. The local residents, kind and welcoming, greeted them warmly, happy to see new families arriving. Soon, the doctor appeared and introduced himself to everyone, brimming with confidence. He promised no one would have to suffer anymore. With that, he ordered his men to begin distributing clean water. Looking at the spotless rooms and the crystal clear water, Suna, who hadn't had a proper bath in 3 years, finally smiled in relief. But just as she thought their hardships were over, what happened next would shake her to her core. Moments later, the teacher announced that, in order to focus on youth development, family members wouldn't be allowed to live with the kids. Though the announcement left many confused, the teacher brushed it off with vague explanations. From that moment on, Suna's sharp instincts kicked and something felt off, and her suspicions quickly deepened. During class, when it was time for introductions, she noticed something chilling. The students didn't react at all. Even worse, their expressions looked blank, soulless. The entire classroom felt like a graveyard. At first, Suna assumed the kids were just under a lot of pressure, but when she noticed identical scars behind each of their ears, a cold shiver ran down her spine. Though Suna tried to quietly warn her friend Joo-ye, she was shocked to find that Joo-ye had already been completely brainwashed. The doctor, of course, wasn't about to waste such a willing subject. The innocent, trusting Joo-ye instantly agreed to take part in one of the doctor's experiments. Haunted by the strange atmosphere inside the apartment, Suna couldn't shake her growing sense of dread. Determined to uncover the truth, she snuck into the doctor's office late that night. There, on his desk, she found a notebook and its contents made her blood run cold. It didn't just detail animal evolution, it outlined how to extract animal DNA, inject it into humans, and achieve immortality. Every step of this inhumane experiment was recorded in disturbing detail. The horrifying truth left Suna completely shattered. But what truly left Suna in disbelief was seeing Joo-ye already lying on the operating table. Before she could even figure out a way to help her, the doctor suddenly returned to the room. And he wasn't alone. Joo-ye's parents followed him in. Apparently, after not seeing their daughter for too long, they'd caused a scene at the factory. To avoid drawing unwanted attention, the doctor had no choice but to bring them in. When they saw their daughter lying motionless on the surgical bed, they were frozen with shock. But what horrified them even more was the reassurance the doctor offered next. He showed them another subject, a torso with no lower body, whose heart was still beating in its chest. He explained that he had started this experiment years ago in a desperate attempt to save his daughter. At the time, he was just one step away from success, but the military, deeming his work far too insane, tried to shut him down. Then, just as the situation was reaching a boiling point, that cataclysmic earthquake struck. After the military withdrew, the doctor hurriedly injected the serum into his daughter's body, and judging by the results, it had worked. But despite the doctor's insistence that Joo-ye wasn't actually dead, her parents couldn't accept what they were seeing. In a panic, they tried to intervene, but the moment they did, Joo-ye began to convulse violently, foaming at the mouth. Within seconds, her life came to a tragic end. From behind the screen, Suna watched in horror, holding her breath. What she didn't expect was what came next. The doctor, furious and unhinged, turned to Joo-ye's grieving parents and ended their lives with a surgical knife. Suna could only pray she wouldn't be discovered, but fate was not on her side. The doctor soon spotted her and Suna was chosen to replace Joo-ye as the next subject. Meanwhile, Nam-san and his crew arrived outside the apartment. Since it wasn't a scheduled delivery day, the bald thug claimed they just happened to catch a girl and were passing by. But the soldiers, sharp-eyed and on alert, quickly sensed something wasn't right. Seeing that their original plan wasn't working, Nam-san decided to strike first. With the truck charging full speed, they smashed straight through the entrance of the apartment building. Before the soldiers outside could react, Nam-san and his team were already unleashing a hail of bullets. Even though the soldiers had them outnumbered, they were no match for the group's overwhelming firepower. The front line was wiped out in no time. Guided by Eun-ho, the three of them quickly made their way to a basement level. Strangely, the soldiers didn't seem to be following. Just as they were questioning the silence, Eun-ho found her old teammates, but what she didn't expect was that they had all been mutated due to the doctor's relentless experiments. With their minds completely gone, Nam-san had no choice but to put them all down. The mutated soldiers were tough, each with insane regeneration abilities, and their combat skills were still sharp, but even they couldn't stand up to heavy weaponry for long. Meanwhile, the teacher updated the doctor on the situation. The doctor stayed calm on the surface, but just to be safe, he broadcast a message to Nam-san, urging him to give up his futile resistance. Nam-san's answer? More gunfire. Furious, the doctor ordered his officers to stop Nam-san at all costs, but sharp-eared as ever, Nam-san had already picked up on movement outside the door. Just when they thought the threat had been wiped out, another wave of soldiers stormed in. To rescue Suna as quickly as possible, Nam-san told the others to go on ahead while he stayed behind to hold the line. Once his shotgun ran dry, Nam-san pulled the massive machete from his back. What followed was a brutal bloodbath. The tight, narrow space became his personal playground. When his arms got tired from swinging, he casually picked them off with a few shots. Moments later, the basement was drenched in silence and blood. Learning from the families that the kids were being held on the 8th floor, Nam-san, with his injured leg, grabbed a machine gun to use as a crutch and started climbing. Meanwhile, Eun-ho stayed behind to cover Ji-wan, mowing down several soldiers with her machine gun, but then the officer appeared blocking her path. The two locked eyes, and without a word, launched into a vicious fight. The officer, having injected the same serum, easily overpowered her, despite giving it everything she had. Eun-ho couldn't keep up with a monster who could heal almost instantly. Elsewhere, Ji-wan reached the classroom and found the students. He shot a soldier in front of them, but the kids didn't even flinch. Desperate to find Suna, he took the teacher hostage and demanded to be led to the lab. But just then, the officers spotted him. Fortunately, Nam-san arrived just in time.
뭐 묻은 거야?
네가 그 사냥꾼이냐?
그럼 사랑꾼이겠냐?
재밌네.
A fierce hand-to-hand brawl erupted. At first glance, it looked like a fair fight, but watching closely, it was clear. These two were evenly matched, and that was the problem. For the first time ever, Nam-san realized his fists might not be enough. Against an opponent like this, things weren't going to be easy.
이 새끼들은 왜 죽지를 않아.
너 나 못 죽여.
Maybe it was that last remark that finally pushed Nam-san over the edge. He grabbed the officer's head and slammed it into the glass, ending the unfair fight once and for all. Meanwhile, the doctor, having just injected himself with a fresh dose of serum, prepared to leave with his precious creation, but as he gazed proudly at his daughter floating in the tank, declaring himself humanity's savior, he was abruptly interrupted. Suna had regained consciousness. The doctor was stunned. Test subjects usually didn't wake up that quickly. Suddenly, his own body began reacting. That's when he realized he had failed to create the serum. It turned out Suna had never trusted the clean water from the very beginning, so she never drank it. Because the experimental serum required adjustment based on the subject's condition, her resistance had thrown the entire formula off. Enraged, the doctor moved to eliminate her, but Ji-wan arrived just in time. Still, the doctor used Suna as a hostage, forcing Ji-wan to drop his weapon. Not willing to risk anything, the doctor ordered his men to pack up his daughter and prepare for escape. But just as they reached the exit, Nam-san appeared and blocked their path. While a female soldier provided cover, the slippery doctor tried sneaking out the back. As he left, the teacher desperately begged him to save her. The doctor, cold as ever, decided to relieve her of her pain instead. Luckily, Ji-wan jumped in at the last second and shielded both her and Eun-ho from death. Elsewhere, as the doctor tried to slip away with his daughter, a resident spotted him. Thinking back to how lifeless the kids had looked after returning from treatment, the villagers demanded answers. The doctor tried gaslighting them one more time, but they weren't buying it anymore. When one of the villagers dumped the last of his serum on the ground, something inside the doctor finally snapped. Furious, he grabbed a machine gun and opened fire on the crowd. What he didn't realize was his suitcase had been hit, and 3 small holes pierced the containment chamber inside. Before he could even process the loss, the The doctor vomited a flood of orange liquid. Nam-san stepped out of the building moments later, seeing the doctor still trying to resist. Nam-san didn't hesitate, he sent him straight to hell. At last, everything went quiet, and then rain began to fall. A soft, cleansing downpour, as if the heavens themselves were telling them the worst was over. On the way back, Nam-san took Suna to pay respects to her grandmother. After that, they returned to the village they once called home. Nam-san went back to his life as a survival expert, but something had changed. He was finally stepping into his second act, a new chapter. In the end, Nam-san and the village beauty started living a shameless, carefree life of their own.